Hello, guys. Welcome back to another lecture prediction. This time we have Tim Scott. He's a senator from South Carolina, and he's a African American Republican. And I think he would do somewhat decent among African American voters because I do think when they do run an African American candidate, they typically do a couple percentage points better among them. That just typically is a trend with them. Even though Herschel Walker really didn't do all that well, I mean, he wasn't a good candidate to begin with. So I really don't think using him as a baseline is a good example of that. But yeah, let's just start off with this election. So I do think that Tim Scott would do well in the South. But issue is, he really isn't all that populist. I mean, you look at him on the issues, he was for NAFTA, which he was for reforming it, basically, and still doing it. So I really don't think he'd be amazing as a candidate. He would carry Alaska by over 10%. But let's start off with the safer states. So Colorado, New Mexico, Virginia. I just don't think they're really that competitive. I don't even think New Mexico or Virginia would be that competitive at all. I think Biden would carry these states by over 10% in each of them. In the southern states, he would do well in Texas still. He's not a terrible candidate for the state of Texas. He would also do well in Florida, carrying by a likely margin as well. But in North Carolina and Georgia, I think he would win North Carolina, no doubt. But Georgia, I do think he could make it a little bit more competitive than usual. I mean, Georgia isn't that much of a populous state, but I still think Biden would edge out Tim Scott in the state of Georgia, just because on the issues, it just seems that Tim Scott is way too pro-life, which honestly would hurt him in a swing state like Georgia. He he just tends to be a little bit too much of an establishment Republican in all the wrong issues. I mean, we saw how John Ossoff and Reverend Warnock campaigned in Georgia around the 2021 elections. They actually, yeah, they it was basically on a bunch of populist issues they campaigned on, and that's what enabled them to win in Georgia. So honestly, the way how Tim Scott is, he's like an anti-populist. So I just don't really think he would win Georgia just by being an anti-populist. Okay, let's head to New England. So in New Hampshire and Maine, I just think that Tim Scott really wouldn't be able to appeal that well to both of these states, and I think Biden would easily win them over. Tim Scott would still get a victory in Maine second, but a narrow one, much more narrow than if Trump were to be the nominee in Maine second. I think Tim Scott would lose some rural appeal that Trump has. In Nevada and Arizona, I still think Biden would win Nevada, and I still think he would win Arizona, but I just don't think Tim Scott would appeal that well to Latinos in this state, and the independents would probably swing towards Biden because of Tim Scott's extreme positioning on issues. In Iowa and Ohio, just because of how anti-populist Tim Scott is on the issues, I don't really think he would do that well in Iowa, only winning it by a lean margin and only winning Ohio by a lean margin. He's not a terrible Republican candidate, but I just think he's a really boring one. Whenever you hear him talk, he's really not that energetic, honestly. And even though Biden's like super old and stuff like that, I just think that on the issues, Biden would just do better than him, especially with populist issues. And Nebraska's second, even a seat is a likely district for Joe Biden. Okay, now we're down to the four last states here. Minnesota, I think Biden would win by a likely margin. And even Michigan by a likely margin, just because of how Tim Scott is on the issue of NAFTA, on reforming it. It's really not going to fly that well in the Rust Belt, especially in Michigan and in Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin. So it's pretty much the 2020 map, but Michigan and Pennsylvania are safer wins, and so is Wisconsin, a much safer win. Georgia's significantly closer, but still, I think this would enable Biden to actually keep the Senate because of the margin in Ohio. Tim Scott would only carry the state by about 4 against Biden, so yeah, that would actually probably enable a lot of ticket splitters to get Sherrod Brown the victory here. So overall, a decent win for Biden on here. He probably holds the Senate with this map. I'll see you guys in the next video.